Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. Nechama Leibowitz. This is, I guess, the end of this group of 3 lectures on great Torah commentators, and she is the only 20th century figure that we've studied this time around. She's also the only female scholar that we've studied. She's actually among the only female Torah scholars. In fact, she's the only woman who's on the shelf in our Beit Midrash. There are probably many Beit Midrash where she's the only female author. Although, actually, I should say the Babylonian Talmud was edited by a woman. The Vilna Shas was the typesetting, and was done by a widow and her brothers, the Ram widow, Devorah Ram. So okay, but in any event, so that's something else interesting about her. And I guess she's also someone I feel like kind of a personal connection to, insofar as people who taught me Torah studied with her. Right. So that's meaning that, which is not true of anyone else we've mentioned in this series. People studied with her. Right. So she was born in 1905 in Riga, capital of Latvia. And she is homeschooled by her parents, who seem to have been very really interesting intellectuals. Her older brother, Yeshayahu Leibowitz, also went on to become a very famous philosopher and chemist, and a political thinker. In 1919, the family moves to Berlin, and she studies university there, University of Berlin, Heidelberg, and Marburg. This is the same time, with all these, famous Jewish intellectuals were studying in universities in Berlin at that time. Leibowitz, Rav Hutner were all students in these universities at the time. Her brother was in school at the time there, and the Leibowitz Rabbi was passing through. He ended up,
Heschel was there.
What? Heschel was there. Yes. And there are all sorts of, stories about their, interactions when they were young in Berlin. 1930, she earns a doctorate. Her dissertation is Translation Techniques of Judeo-German Bible Translation in the 15th and 16th centuries, as exemplified by translations of the Book of Psalms. Okay, so Yiddish translations of Psalms in the 15th and 16th centuries, and what those translations are indicating about, like the translation, like what's the linguistic or what's the interpretational framework of these translations, right? I don't know. I've never not read her thesis, but you can, I'm just thinking of, the most famous translation of one of the most famous, the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Torah, has a stance against anthropomorphism, for example. That's sort of a famous thing, and all of the anthropomorphic phrases in the Torah get unanthropomorphized in the Targum, right? Is you going to say something? Or?
No, they distanced it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's like across the board in the Targum, and so it seems clearly that was like an interpretational stance of the translator. So I think based on the title, that's the type of work she was doing in this, studying Yiddish translations of Sefer Tehillim. Then she studies in the Hochschule für Wissenschaft des Judentums. She studies with people like Leo Strauss, Leo Beck, Ellbogen. These are like the Gedolim of early 20th century Mechkar, Wissenschaft, sort of academic studies of Judaism, and she studies with them as well. She started teaching in Berlin. She's at the Adas Yisrael School. That's the school system that was established by Rav Israel Hildesheimer, who was the leader of the separatist, the Austritt Orthodox community in Germany. There are 2 Orthodox communities in Germany. There was the Gemeinde community and the Austritt community. In 1871, Samuel Raphael Hirsch gets the German government to allow Orthodox Jews and other religious minorities to secede from the Gemeinde, the overarching organization for the religion, to form their own miniature Gemeinde for their specific religion. And he felt it was forbidden as a matter of Jewish law and philosophically seriously important for Orthodox Jews to only be members of Orthodox organizations, that all leadership in the Jewish community should be in the hands of people who were observant and Orthodox. And the Jewish community in Germany was dominated by Reform Jews, and so he felt that was intolerable, and so he urged his, sorry, a little tangent, but it's important history to know. He urged his community to secede, to form a separatist organization. This is called an Austritt community. The Austritt means secession, and So his community in Frankfurt was like such a community. In Berlin, Azriel Hildesheimer also led and ousted a separatist Orthodox community. Most Orthodox Jews, however, in Berlin and in Frankfurt and elsewhere in Germany, did not join these separatist communities. And even those who did join the separatist communities, many of them, maintained their membership in the Gemeinde, in the general overarching Jewish community. A main reason why they wanted to do that was because, what the poll was, why they wanted to be in the Gemeinde. What? Well, it was supporting any, meaning everyone was paying taxes, and if you were a Christian, you would support the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church or like the Jewish organization, and if you were Orthodox, they would support your Orthodox organization. I don't think, but the reason why they kept their membership in the Gemeinde because they wanted to be buried in the cemeteries with their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their great-great-grandparents. These were ancient Jewish cemeteries in these cities, and if you were not part of the community, you could be buried in those cemeteries.
I was looking at the Hirsch Chumash on Pesach, and it said that there were only 500 families.
In Frankfurt altogether, or in his community?
In his community in Frankfurt.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
so he had a school, and he had most Orthodox Jews in Germany did not, in that sense, it was very important to him, and he was not successful, and maybe we'll do a class on that. It's a very fascinating history, and it happened in Hungary, it happened in Germany, it didn't happen in Lithuania. The Netziv was against Auschwitz, but today, like that is like you can still plot like Orthodox Jews on that same exact dynamic. There's a handful of Orthodox rabbis who are members of the Interdenominational Chicago Board of Rabbis. And then there's something called the Rabbinic Action Committee, which is a way for those Orthodox rabbis who are not members of the Chicago Board of Rabbis to do things with the Chicago Board of Rabbis under the auspices of JUF. And then there's the Aguda, which is completely outside of that system and has no connection with the Federation or that, right? So, I'm sure they do have Aguda does cooperate with the Federation in certain ways, but not very carefully. Let's say very carefully, right? So that's okay. That was a tangent, but I'm sorry. Okay, so she's teaching in an Auschwitz school and she teaches Ivrit B'Ivrit in Rav Hildesheimer school. This is like there are not so many people teaching Ivrit B'Ivrit in 1930, and right, but there were but it did exist then as a teaching method. In 1931, she makes Aliyah together with her husband. Her husband was her cousin. He was much older than her. Yedidia Lippman Leibowitz. They did not have children. They're married for many years. She is appointed a professor of Bible education at Tel Aviv University, and that's where she earns, her title as a professor. Although she was, I think, mostly known as Nechama. She signed her letters Nechama. Her students call her Nechama. There's a really wonderful essay about her in this book. This book was published earlier this year, Torah and Western Thought, Intellectual Portraits of Orthodoxy and Modernity. So it's sort of short intellectual biographies of maybe like a dozen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So nine figures, who are sort of important, intellectual portraits of Orthodoxy and modernity. Again, she's the only woman amongst the 9. She's the only one who isn't a rabbi among the 9, and the author of the essay about her in this book has a note where he says, her name is Yael Unterman. She wrote a full book-length biography of Nechama Leibowitz, and she writes in my biographical work, mentioned the previous footnote, which is called Nechama Leibowitz, Teacher and Bible Scholar. Okay, I referred to this legendary teacher as Nechama throughout. This was due to her own preference to be addressed by her first name always, and it indeed achieved the effect of granting the readers a feeling of closeness and familiarity with her. However, in this volume, it's important and appropriate to give her the respect she deserves. Hence, like the other figures in this work, she'll be referred to by her title of professor. Okay, so she's Professor Leibowitz in this book, but people who knew her and studied with her called her Nechama. 1942, she begins sending out Gilionot. Okay, these were Gilionot, like little source sheets, little questions on the weekly parsha. These were mimeographed. I don't actually know what a mimeograph machine is. I think it was before.
Oh, please.
Sorry, I know what they do. I know. I've never seen one. I've seen things that have been mimeographed. I've never seen a mimeograph machine. Sorry. See the section of the. Before they had right? So technology that existed before photocopying for disseminating and copying things. Before they had photocopying. had these Xerox things before they had photocopy machines. And she would send these out to students, to people actually all over the world, and she received answers. And she would comment and have almost like a correspondence with hundreds of people. And this was a major, major focus of her work from 1942 to 1972. Okay, so it was many, many years. I have here a collection of her mimeographs. You'll know this is Parsha. This is from the library here. Paul brought them. Yeah. So you can see this is mimeography. Okay. And just typed out, no fancy layout or anything. Just typed out questions, citations from psukim, from verses, from commentators with questions, and she sent these out. At some point, someone said, maybe you could print together with the answers. It'd be more useful if you included the answers as well. And eventually, she sort of didn't want to do that, but she eventually agreed. And the work with the answers that eventually became these books here. Right? These are basically Gilyonot with her answers and explanations. Where the actual Gilyonot is just questions. She gives the answers to some of those questions, and it's published in English, and eventually, this is a very popular, very important work. The Gilyonot themselves, if you don't happen to have these mimeograph sheets, a few years ago were all put online. It's like Nechama.org.il, and her family put that together, and you can search by Parsha, and these are all the topics, and then these are the years she dealt with the topic, and you have then you have like a few lines, here's a verse, here's what Rashi says, and 3 questions. Just the original Gilyonot, so just the questions, no answers, and it's an excellent, excellent resource, and so that's sort of all this material has been now, sort of digitized. So that's what can we some things we can say about her. So one.
When did she?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I forgot to put that here. She died in 1997. Sorry, I forgot to put it on the sheet. 1997. I remember actually. Yeah, I remember when she died. It was on a Wednesday. No, it was a Sunday. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I do have a distinct memory of when she died, and So one feature of her scholarship is the sort of the breadth of sources that she draws from, and so here's a letter she wrote. It's a correspondence from Rabbi Yehuda Ansbacher, who was a rabbi in Tel Aviv, and he criticized her for citing non-Orthodox and non-Jewish scholars in her work. So here's her response to it. This was published a few years ago in Hebrew and translated English also a few years ago. More to the point, let me turn to the latter part of your comments. It is true that I cite the words of people who are not observant of the mitzvot. If their words seem correct to me and can reveal the light of Torah and display its greatness and holiness to the student, I work according to the principle, accept the truth from wherever it comes. Who said that? Accept the truth from wherever it comes? Who's that famous? Who's that? No? A Jewish? No? What?
Is that with Arthur?
No. That's take the fruit and throw out the, yeah. Accept the truth from wherever it comes is Rambam. That's Maimonides' dictum. That's right, because for him it was Aristotle and whatever the Greek philosophers, so for her it's these others, okay? Accept the truth from wherever it comes. What can I say? Beno Jacob was an extreme reformer who served in the Santag Gemeinde and certainly transgressed an enormous portion of our holy Torah's mitzvot. The Santag Gemeinde was a reform congregation where the Sabbaths or the main services were on Sunday. Like in Chicago, and certainly transgressed in addition to the fact that he was anti-Zionist, etc. Yet, I learned from his books. Auge has excellent proofs that an eye for an eye, according to the simple meaning, refers to monetary compensation. Quellen, Kritik und Exegesis of Genesis and Exodus is a forceful work against the documentary hypothesis. More than from many books written by bona fide God-fearing Jews, his claims against biblical criticism and his proofs of their frivolousness and their errors, no one has ever written better things than them, even Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman Zatzal, as difficult as it is to mention the name of this Gaon together with Beno Jacob, as well as Yisachar Jacobson, Alav Shalom, and Dr. Muriel, who wrote a work on the Torah. Many of my friends, among them Rabbi David Kalabach Zatzal, who for many years taught with me in the seminar in Jerusalem, also learned from his works. He opened our eyes to see things which we had not seen before, and therefore toward a true understanding of the Torah. Professor Umberto Cassuto Zal, who was God-fearing and scrupulous regarding the mitzvot, said a number of things that are very far from my belief in Torah Misinai, and I won't be part of their dissemination, and therefore I will not pay heed to who said it, but only to what is said. So she quotes Cassuto a lot. She quotes Beno Jacob a lot. She doesn't endorse their worldview, but she learned from their Torah insights, and therefore she feels it's appropriate to share them. There is no need to say that Martin Buber was not a good Jew, according to the normal understanding of this concept. I knew him, and he was not in any way a man after my heart. Absolutely not. The story that the Gentile wrote seems to me, I don't know what this allusion is to, I think something in the letter that she received, to be slightly far from the truth. At the end of the day, this was not an innocent offhand remark, but rather one made by someone interested in proving a point. But if it is true, then this shows me, which I already knew, that Buber flattered Gentiles, and if he truly said what is written, this is an abomination. Although according to what he said to me, he didn't love Christianity at all. He certainly didn't believe in these things, and if he said them, it was in order to flatter the Gentiles, and this is the absolute worst. But what can I do? As I and many religious teachers learned many correct things from him in Tanakh, especially the whole concept of the key word, the Leibowitz, and the deep meaning that its application Torah hints to. And although our Midrash also recognizes principle Ne'amar Kan, V'Ne'amar Sham, and similarly Mida K'neged Mida and more, it is nevertheless the merit of Buber, and even more so Rosenzweig. They expanded this concept and revealed several places that I have not found in any early sources. I will not withhold this good from students by hiding this from them. Okay, so the Leitwort, that's become a very, Leitwort is a word that appears, we'll see an example of this later, multiple times in a given text that is signifying or teaching or alluding to some deeper theme of that text. And then one can then say, oh, well, these are two different passages in, two episodes in Tanakh that both have the same Leitwort, the same words appear again and again in, let's say, the story of Esther and the story of Joseph, for example. So that's, okay, that must be telling us something about some echo of Joseph in the story of Esther. And then we can, once someone points it out to you, you can then find those echoes, for example. Okay? And so on and so forth. Okay? So that's a technique that she says, okay, so the Midrash did that also without sort of showing their work and explaining it. But it's really a new literary tool that she got from Buber. Several times I showed Talmidei Chachamim details from Beno Jacob's important book, Auge, and they thanked me and rejoiced as if discovering a great treasure. Should I then hide the name of the author? This I cannot do. Who are those whose waters we drink and whose names we don't mention? Okay? Talmudic allusion. So that's sort of one sort of piece about her work that's sort of worth pointing out. So. And I guess that's also something you can sort of see this whole spectrum in contemporary Orthodox writings. Who do you quote, and whom do you quote by name, and whom do you quote by title, etc., and all that kind of othering or distancing or not, based on people's who they were and what they did. And she rejected that. She felt her worldview, her insight into Torah came from a broad spectrum of people with a broad spectrum of ideology and practice, and she feels it's appropriate to draw from it. Okay. So I want to point out a few other things. I had some technical difficulties putting this together, so I didn't show you as much as I wanted to. Let's look at the page, the photocopy from the sort of the end of the. After the Sefaria sheet, I have a photocopied. Oh, sorry, let's go to page. Sorry. Okay. I apologize. Okay, it's printed page 1 of 4. Then it goes page 2 of 4. Then it goes page 4 of 4. That's a mistake. Okay, right? Go to page 3 of 4. Got it? Oh, look, sorry. So here's the end of the letter. Let's finish the letter. This is my opinion, which I've held my entire life. I I thank you for writing nice things to me about my class in the Beit Knesset, and I wish you and your family a happy and kosher Pesach and good health. May merit to see a Pesach that brings rebuilding the temple with great respect and thanks for consideration. Nechama. Okay, so again, you see her like real. She doesn't back down. She sticks to her guns with a lot of modesty as well in the note. Okay, so one theme that I think she's one of the ones who really kind of drew this out. And I've spoken about this before in her name, and I think. Again, she's not. I can't say she's the first. She's not the first to say it or be aware of it. I think Chazal were aware of this too, but she was like really aware of it. She showed this connection in a way that I don't think anyone had done before, and that I think has really sort of influenced the way many people after her have seen connections between the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the creation of the universe. So some examples, sources 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so this is from Genesis. Vayachulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tziva'am. Vayachal Elohim b'yom hashvi mikol melachto asher asa v'yishbot b'yom hashvi mikol melachto asher asa. Heaven and earth and were finished, host of them. Seventh day God finished his work. Okay, Vayachulu, Vayachal. And look at source 5. This is from Exodus 39. Vatechel kol avodat mishkan el moed v'yasu b'nei Yisrael kechol asher tzivah Hashem el Moshe ken asu. The case of the repetition of Vayachulu, Vayachal, Vatechel, and then Asher Asa and Ken Asu, Asher Siva, right? So it's a lot of similar words of making and doing and this completion and resting. Source 6. Vayakem et hachatzer saviv mishkan mizbeach v'yiten et masach shar chatzer v'yachal Moshe et malacha. There it's like explicit. And Moshe completed the work. V'yachal Moshe et melacha, very much parallel to Vayachal Elohim b'yom hashvi melachto. Okay, the language of melacha and Vayachal, so completing the work. It's there. Moshe's doing it, and God did it. That's striking. Okay, source 7. Vayar Moshe et kol melacha v'hine asu otak asher tzivah Hashem chen asu v'yorecho tam Moshe. And Moshe, right? He completes. He steps back. What does he do? He looks and he blesses. Who also completes, looks, and blesses? That's what God does in Genesis. Again, striking comparison lined up for you, and here it is on page 478 and 479. Even more. Look at page 479. You see this? Look at on the left-hand column. I couldn't put this in the source sheet neatly, so I just photocopied the page. Look at the left-hand column. These are phrases from creation. Vayas Elohim, Vayas, Vayas. And then on the right, Vasu, Vasu, Vyasita. Okay, same word. And you shall make, and you shall make, and he made, and he made. Next, Hishesh Shemim Asa, Hashem Hashem Bet Aretz, Et Hayam Mikol Asher Bam. And then Vayishkon Kavod Hashem Al Har Sinai V'Yachaseu Ha'anan Sheshet Yamim, 7 days, 6 days. Vayikra El Moshe, Bayom HaShvi'i Mitoch Hanan, Vaynach B'Yom HaShvi'i. Okay, again, that's. So 6 days of creation, 6 days of erecting the Mishkan, 7th day he rests, and B'yom HaShvi'i, Moshe is called when he comes into the tent, into the cloud. Ve'chulu Hashem v'aretz kol tziva'am, and then V'techel kol avodat Mishkan Ohamed, Ve'chal Elohim b'yom HaShvi'i, Ve'chal Moshe et melacha, V'yar Elohim, V'yar Moshe, V'yinei tov ma'od, V'yinei asu atak asher tzivah Hashem ken asu, V'yivarech Elohim, V'yivarech otam Moshe. Parallel. So it's the doing, 6 days, 7th day, completion, seeing, vihine, and behold, everything's great, and he blesses. So it's not just like those three, it's parallel, and I think she's the one who lined it up in that way. So Chazal were aware, like she didn't know that the connection between creation of the universe and creation of the Mishkan, that was known before. And the connection of the Mishkan and Shabbat is, I think, up front and center in the Torah, and Chazal also, like when they learn the laws of Shabbat from the creation of the Mishkan, they're essentially working with this underlying connection between the tabernacle and creation. But I think she's the one who kind of did the work of, again, inspired by Buber's method of the light fort, of these words that, when you have Vayas, Sheshet, Shet, and he did, making 6, 7, completing, seeing, behold, blessing. Those 7 phrases appear in one group of texts again and again, and then in another section of text again and again. That brings those two texts in conversation with each other. And so then she can say, okay, so what is the Mishkan about? The Mishkan it's our response to God's creation of the universe. God made the universe, we make the Mishkan. Her brother, I've spoken about this before, her brother, Yeshayahu Leibowitz, the philosopher, who also, he had like a Parsha radio show in Israel. So and which has been published. You have like a big fat book of however many years of Yeshayahu Leibowitz's Parsha radio stuff, and he makes the point that the Torah deals with the entire creation of the universe and the heavens and the earth and everything in them, all the plant and animal life and human life. All of it takes a couple dozen verses. Whereas the Mishkan, which was a piece of fabric and wood, and a building that could fit probably 3 of them in this room, is half of the book of Exodus. Right? It's Truma, it's Tzav, Yaakov, Pekudei, and then not to mention it's the operating manual is always like Sefer Vayikra and half of Sefer Bamidbar, and so he sort of also he was also operating in that same comparison, but he's sort of drawing our attention to the fact that creation, he thinks, is religiously meaningless. The fact that God made the universe, okay, so that has no religious meaning. It was done by God. We exist. Okay, we find ourselves in a world that exists. If you wanted to create a universe, you would want to maybe be useful to you if you were, but you're not, right? None of us are going to create a universe. So it's religiously meaningless. What is religiously meaningful is the actions we take in service of God. Right? It's our choices, things we do in service of God. That creates holiness. That's religious devotion. That's religiously significant, and so that's what the Torah writes about. Whereas the creation of the universe, that's like an afterthought. That's not something about. Okay, so we can discuss that theory another time. So I want you to see again. I thought this to me is something I got from her, and I think others did as well. I think this is one of her discoveries. Okay, original discoveries, and that's I guess a question to sort of one asks a secondary question about her scholarship. Was she a scholar of Chumash and Tanakh, or was she a scholar of Parshanut? In other words, was she meaning Parshanut is Parshanut defined as the classical endeavor, of the commentary literature, Rashi, Ramban, Ibn Ezra, etc. Was she a scholar? Was she a Rashi scholar, or was she a Torah scholar? What was her scholarship really focused on? Most of the Gilgal note, 80% maybe, I don't know, is Rashi says this, where does he get that? What's bothering him? What's his question? How is he answering? How does he understand this verse? And how is Rashi and Ibn Ezra, who says this, what word is he reading differently in the Chumash that gives rise to, Ibn Ezra comes out with a different answer than Rashi. I think that's her main method. So some would say, well, she wasn't really a Tanakh scholar, she was a Parshanut scholar. She was a scholar of this literature, this endeavor of the commentators. But I think in this instance, this is not the word. This is primary, actual discovery of something in the Torah itself. It was more than just scholarship about the commentators. The other thing I want to show you, and another thing I want to show you. Let's go back to 404. I know I've spoken about this before because I think it's one's beautiful ideas, and it's one of my most, perhaps my favorite thing she's ever said, because it's she discovers so much meaning in just one word. Okay, so I think it's a really beautiful example of what you can do if you know your stuff, and it also exhibits not just her brilliance, but also Rashi's brilliance, which is also great. It's her own brilliance, but her brilliance as reflected in uncovering something that Rashi says. And it's convincing. I think she's right. The first time I shared this idea, somebody who heard me present this idea said to me afterwards, what you just said, it's good, and it also is true. It also might be true. So it's not just convincing. It's not just a nice idea. Sometimes it's a nice idea, but it's just it's just like something you could, like Shal Shus Torah, like something, there's like a different, there's like the different standards of evidence. There's beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a, probable cause, and there's Shal Shus Torah, sort of something you would say over. So this was not just inspiring. He also said it was just a beautiful idea. He also was a true idea. So here's the Torah. The Torah says, Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha u'kala. Okay, this is Parsha Re'eh, and from Dvarim, from Deuteronomy chapter 11. Behold, I set before you this day blessing and curse. Eta bracha asher tishma'u el mitzvot Hashem elokechem asher anochi mitzveh etchem hayom. The blessing is if you listen to the mitzvot of the Lord your God that I command you today. V'haklala, and the curse is im lo tishma'u el mitzvot Hashem elokechem v'sartem in haderech asher anochi mitzveh etchem hayom lalechet acharei elohim acherim asher lo yadatem. And the curse is if you do not listen to the commands of Hashem your God and you deviate from the path that I command you today to walk after other gods that you do not know. So the question that one wants to ask is that would arise from the fact the phrases aren't parallel. There's a disconnect, right? Because the bracha is asher tishma'u, and the curse is im lo tishma'u. Okay, asher means that, on account of. Im lo is if you do not, right? There isn't a perfect parallel between the two halves of this condition. The blessing is asher, if you listen, and the curse is im lo, if you do not listen. Right? So why are these two different words? Understand the question?
One has if and the other doesn't really have it.
Or maybe they both have it. I mean, if you were to write a translation quickly, you would translate both. You'd probably use the English word, like if for both of them, I think. In fact, this English translation here has if for both of them, right?
If and if not.
If and if not, right? But in fact, the Hebrew is asher and im lo. So, right? So the translator, I think, adequately correct English, they both mean if. But in fact, they're two fairly different Hebrew words. It doesn't say im tishma'u and im lo tishma'u. It says asher tishma'u and im lo tishma'u. That's a disconnect. Okay? And the commentators all have what to say about this. Okay? They notice this type of difference in word. So Rashi says eta bracha. The blessing asher tishma'u eta bracha al menat asher tishma'u. He adds the words al menat. The blessing is on condition that you listen. Al menat asher tishma'u. So Rashi, the greatness of Rashi is his efficiency of language. This is a 4-word comment of Rashi. And if Rashi, right, he won't use 5 words if he can say it in 4 words, and he won't use 3 if he needs 4. Okay, he says what he has to say in the maximum efficiency of language. And this is also another thing that Nechama Leibowitz, I think, taught, that Rashi should not be read as he's not. Like every line of Rashi is answering a question. Every word of Rashi, no word of Rashi is superfluous. Again, maximal efficiency in his language, and he's implicitly responding. Like if he doesn't tell you, he doesn't tell you anything extra. But if you just pay attention, he's responding to defending mistaken interpretations, rejecting Havaminas. Right? You might think it means this; it really means that. Here's a discrepancy, and I'm going to tell you the reason. So the question that I presented to you, that's the question Rashi's answering. No, he doesn't tell you that, but that is the question he's answering. And he answers it by putting in the word al-manat. He says, like, asher is another way of saying al-manat. So what does that mean? I'll just also point out, I don't think she made this point, but it was Professor Chaim Soloveitchik told me, and I think he's correct, because other teachers of mine have said the same thing. Rashi's commentary on the Talmud is the same way, in that it's also maximally efficient in language, and every comment is for a purpose. So sometimes the purpose could be the Talmud uses a strange word that you probably don't know. I'll tell you what it means in a more simple word. But that he does that occasionally if it's like a really unusual word. But very often as well in this commentary on the Talmud, you might think the phrase means this. Here's a question you have. Here's something that if you're thinking deeply, you're going to be bothered by this, and I'm giving you a solution. Right? Rashi's he was not a medieval art scroll. He was not sort of holding your hand and spoon feeding you. He was a Rishon. He was responding to possible misinterpretations and showing you what he thought the right way of understanding it was. So Nechama Leibowitz taught that's how you read Rashi on Chumash. I think you can read Rashi that way on the Talmud as well, which is what's so terrible about the English art scroll Gemara. they sort of work Rashi's commentary into their English translation, so you have no way of, you just miss all of that, because it's all just sort of one, I understand why they made that choice, but it's very hard otherwise, but that's what they did. Okay. So Nechama Leibowitz pointed out that Almanat is, and you have this passage in, I have the whole, you give you the whole page, that Almanat is a particular type of condition in the Talmud, and Im is another type of condition in Talmudic law, and we saw this actually discussed in Daf Yomi fairly recently in Kedushin. So it's a long discussion. I have one line here. Kol ha'omer almanat ka'omer me'achshav dami. Anyone who says almanat, it's as though he said from now. It's a condition that is retroactive to the time that you say it, even though the condition won't be fulfilled until later. So if I say, I will give you this book, Almanat, that you give me $20. So you have an obligation to, we agree on that, right? So you owe me $20, but the book belongs to you right away. Whereas if I say, I'll give you the book, you give me $20, then the book is mine until you pay. Okay? And in Kedushin and Gittin, this can all matter, because when you have different things happening, different sequences, and you have to understand when something happened, so it makes a big difference which language you use.
So
Yeah?
what's the construct of the first one?
Almanat is on condition, on account of, right? But it sort of takes effect right away.
It's payment. It's like net 30.
Getting the blessing
Net
from
30
now,
days payment.
And you owe me the listening and the doing.
Good. So Nechama says that when Rashi says Almanat, he's referencing this Talmudic literature, and he's telling us that when the Torah says Asher, when the Torah uses the word Asher, rather than the expected word, which is Im, we expect the Torah to say Im. If you do mitzvah, you'll get blessed, and if you don't do mitzvah, you'll be cursed. We expect Im to be in both. The Torah replaces the word Im with Asher. So Rashi is telling us the Torah doesn't want us to think it's an Im kind of condition with God. It's an Almanat kind of condition. So what the Torah is saying is the bracha is already given. We already have, like life is a blessing. To be alive is a blessing. We live in this world, that's a blessing that's already given over to us, that then obligates us to listen to the mitzvot and to obey them. But the bracha is not doled out after the fact, the bracha is given already. So it's I think it's a real, it's a very profound religious message. I think it can sort of shape, if you take it to heart, it's telling us something really fundamentally very optimistic, I think, about life, and, to be alive is to be a blessing, that existence is a blessing, and that blessing, God sort of gives us already. He already gave us the blessing, and then mitzvot we're not doing mitzvot as in hopes of some future reward. We're observing mitzvot in gratitude for this remarkable gift of being alive. And she reads all that into, again, this is like a four-word commentary. Forward comment by Rashi, 4 words, Almanat, really 2 words, Almanat, okay? So I think it's so it's, again, my favorite thing she wrote. It's really brilliant, and it requires a breadth of knowledge, and I think it's true as well, okay? It explains a curious detail in the Torah. So, in our remaining, any questions or comments? You buy it, you don't buy it, right? Convinced? Yeah. I sort of wanted to, I guess, sort of point out a few sort of issues of kind of secondary scholarship or things to. Because there have been books about her, like in this article and the biography and other different essays about her. There was a conference about her a couple of years ago in New York. Just one of her students, I think, when she first came to Jerusalem and taught young kids, it was one of those women is now 90-something years old and came to the conference and spoke about what it was like to have her as like a teacher, a classroom teacher. So some questions. So okay, one question I already alluded to: was she an educator, or was she a scholar? Was she a scholar of Parshanut, so she was definitely more than an educator. She was definitely a scholar. She, insofar as she had chidushim, she had fresh insights that she developed, she discovered, and that she shared. So she was not just a teacher. Not that being a teacher is educator in the sense of the creativity is in how to impart, how to facilitate students' learning. Whereas a scholar is discovering something nobody thought of, right? That's the dichotomy. She was certainly a master pedagogue, but she was also a scholar. I think I gave you two really strong examples of that. There are many, many more. This other question that sort of exists in her scholarship is she a scholar of Parshanut or a scholar of Torah itself? I think she was both, but I think that dichotomy also deserves to be questioned because, let's say that for most, if you teach people and folk how to understand Parshanut, that's also a way of you're teaching people to read Torah in a particularly deep way, and it's not just right. It's not. If you read superficially, there's another whatever. The art. She had very negative things to say about the. It was either her or one of her students. I'm confused to get the story wrong. But if you just an example of something like a bad example of this would be like the Art Scroll Chumash, where the commentary digest. It's like a total. There's no method. There's no method. There's no worldview. There's no systematic anything. And so they juxtapose, in the same commentary digest, and Ramban says this, and Rashi says that. Now Rashi and Ramban spent giants of our tradition who spent a lifetime developing a comprehensive, systematic approach to understanding the Torah, and that's juxtaposed with some little Shalshis Torah that some little Rebbe said, and put in a sefer, and so maybe Joseph did this or Joseph did that, and it's all just stories. It's all just kind of doesn't mean anything. It doesn't come from anything. It's just here's some episode in the Torah, and here's some we'll just pluck and throw together some different things that people have said about it. And her whole approach to Parshanut was that no, these people weren't just telling stories. They didn't make this up. This emerged from a specific way to read specific words in the Torah. These are choices they made. That came from an interpretive agenda. That was informed by a systematic understanding of what the Torah means and how one reads it. And so, take Rashi seriously, take Ramban seriously, take these the classic commentators really seriously, because they weren't being facile. They were engaged in something that we can kind of recreate their work. We can see what they were doing. We can try to figure out what was informing the interpretive choices that they made. So I think that is more than just scholar of Parshanut in the sense of just knowing Parshanut. It's about how they read verses and how we can read verses too. And then, as we've seen already, she also expanded the library of. It's not just the classic Rashi, Ramban, etc., but also the great, Torah commentaries from the Renaissance and Orthodox Bible scholarship, whom we spoke about in prior weeks, like the Netziv and Mecklenburg, Tav Kabbalah, and the Malbim, and it's also the non-Orthodox Bible scholar Beno Jacob and Kisuto and Buber, etc. All of them, they're all engaged in this process, and we can sort of use all of them together in a way that, again, it's mining meaning from verses. So I think she was a Torah scholar as well. She was not interested in history, right? Nothing about ancient Near East. No, that was just not interesting to her, not significant to her. No parallels to Hammurabi's Code or Gilgamesh stories. That was nothing of the nothing, nor geography of Eretz Yisrael. That's not there at all.
What about the historical context of the Parshanim she was discussing?
Oh, that's interesting.
What was the question?
What about the historical context of like Rashi? You know, like and that's. I don't recall seeing that in anything she's written, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. I'll say this. I think she would have, depends what you mean by historical context. Certainly she was aware that Rashi wrote a different type of commentary than Netziv. Right, and Rabban, right? They were answering different kinds of questions with different kinds of sensitivities, with different assumptions about the Torah and the oral Torah and its relationship to the written Torah, and that, right? So obviously you can't not know that, right? You can't study these works seriously, or even not so seriously, and realize that these are just very different works, coming from people with very different, and we spoke a little bit about actually, maybe last year, about Rashi and Ramban and Netziv and what they were about and what their interpretive agenda was about. So that much, I think the piece that, like, that's which is a kind of history, right? That's like an intellectual history of Torah study and like the history of Torah commentary. So that I think she was aware of. She could not be. The piece, like the degree of historicism, the historical context where I wouldn't see her would be, like it's been pointed out that, the Rashbam, in several places he really like defends Jacob. He makes Jacob be much more honest in his dealings with Esav than you might think, right? So when, Esav sells his birthright, the Rashbam says he sold it for money, and he also got the soup as like and then the stew was just like that was like after he bought it for money, they then had some stew afterwards. The Rashbam puts that in. So somebody with some historical sensitivity could be aware of the role of Jacob as the crafty, dishonest Jew in medieval anti-Semitic literature, and that so it's not is it a coincidence that in that context you have the Rashbam defending Jacob, or Rashi begins all of his first comments in each of the 5 books of the Torah, he says something nice about the Jewish people. So that's what else you can imagine what's the historical context where in his Torah commentary he's trying to be inspiring and uplift people's spirits. What does that mean? You can also see the emergence of Pshat in the Middle Ages as coming from this rediscovery of the importance of the plain sense meaning of the text, separate from rabbinic tradition, that comes from a context in medieval France where Jews and Christians were engaged in religious polemic, arguing about what does this verse really mean. So once you're having those debates about what this verse really means, is this really an allusion to Jesus in Genesis or not? So in that context, you have this flowering of this new way of reading psukim. So that type of historicism, I've not seen anywhere in her, but that's like a second level, right? That seems like a higher level of historicizing, which I have not seen in her. So the other question, the final sort of things to then just to say, I guess, is sort of what comes next, sort of what didn't, and it was a really nice, helpful thing that Yael Inchman does in this essay. She kind of presents 2 different sort of famous Orthodox Tanakh scholars who came after Nechama and did very different things than her. So one is Rav Yoel Ben Nun, who, and the other, she's Aviva Zornberg, right? It's sort of 2 different people who came a generation or 2 generations after Nechama and did sort of very different things. So Rav Yoel Ben Nun is interested in history, he's interested in geography, and he cares a lot about Rashi, Rabban, and Chazal, but he sort of only wants to turn to them after he's kind of figured out what's the pshat that historically, geographically, and once I formulate that pshat, so then I'm going to go to Chazal and to the medieval commentators and show, oh yeah, look, they're actually reading it the same way. Or this is what they're picking up on this as well, or they're not picking up on it as well. And he has new reading. Right? Joseph didn't immediately tell his father that he survived being thrown into the pit, that he's alive in Egypt, because he thinks Jacob was in on the scheme, and that Jacob sends him to his brothers. His brothers throw him into a pit. Joseph never knows that Jacob, as far as Joseph knows, Jacob, was in on it. And that's why he doesn't immediately send for Jacob, and he only reveals himself once Judah says, "Oh, if our father is mourning over you," he's like, "Oh, my father's mourning over me." He wasn't in it, and then immediately he reveals himself. So that's Real Ben Nun. So nobody ever said that ever. It's sort of right. Real Ben Nun said it. Okay, and that's I think like a classic, really like iconoclastic, kind of against the grain, but it sort of answers a bunch of questions. He rejects all the other answers to that question. Why Ramban also writes about why Joseph didn't reveal himself. He rejects Ramban's answers. That's Real Ben Nun. And halakhically also, he does really, he thinks...
He wears tzitzit on his suit jacket.
He wears tzitzit on his suit jacket, right, exactly.
He came to teach at Bar Ilan, and the whole year, I was just fascinated by that. I couldn't even listen.
His jacket has the cut of the jacket. He extended it so that the jacket has four corners, and he wears tzitzit on it. Tzitzit are supposed to be worn on your garments, like you wear in the olden days. They wore robes and stuff, and they had four corners, and they wore tzitzit. So So he doesn't. We don't wear. We wear Western clothes, so really there's no reason to wear tzitzit. So he has tzitzit in his jacket. He also, he thinks you should say Birkat Hamazon if you have a steak. If you have a steak and potatoes, and and you like a giant meal, so you say Birkat Hamazon. Don't tell me because you didn't have a little piece of bread. You don't say Birkat Hamazon. It's on a meal. Chalta b'sadata. You ate. You're full. Say Birkat Hamazon. He thinks you should say. Tfilat Haderech shouldn't be based on distance from leaving the city. It should be every time you're in a car. Like that's Tfilat Haderech. It doesn't matter if you're in or out of the city.
Well, that's because he deals with Israeli traffic.
Fair enough. So very, just creative, that's what we all been doing. And Aviva Zornberg, not read a lot of her stuff. I've heard her speak, I've heard her speak a number of occasions. She's come here, right? I know that because we use the bench chairs on there. Brilliant, kind of mesmerizing, draws on psychoanalysis, and so it's sort of Chazal read through the prism of psychoanalysis. So also just different questions, different sources, different answers, but also uncovering really kind of new things, new insights into Tanakh. Again, informed by Parshanut, like Rav Yoel, Dr. Zornberg, extremely educated in classic Parshanut, but they're using it in a sort of very different way than Nechama Leibowitz. It's a great, so I thought this is Yael Benjamin's kind of interesting juxtaposition of sort of these people who are doing interesting new things in Tanakh a generation later, but it's sort of worth also comparing what Nechama did and what these others a generation later did. But of course, there are also many of her students who are kind of still doing Nechama Leibowitz type work on Parshanut. Again, here's a verse, here's Rashi, here's Ibn Ezra, here's Ramban, and how are they reading? What was animating them? How are they reading such that they are interpreting these verses in different ways? And let's uncover that and read in that with that degree of skill and that degree of care as well. Okay, thank you so much. If you can stick around for Mincha, that would be swell. And next series of Wednesday classes are the Halachot of Lakeview. We're looking at elevator sports and just some kashrut questions. Okay. So.